Alright, hey there everyone. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and today I'm going to be going over Liber Samekh. I'll touch on a bunch of things. I'm not going over line by line, word by word. It's just too much. It would be a really long video. So I'm going over select portions, a little bit of the history, especially what the Bornless one is, what the Headless one is, its relation to the HGA, and some other very important symbols that are in the text. So with no further ado, let's get into this. Liber Samekh, named after the path of Samekh, which is Sagittarius, is vertical on the tree of life, connecting Yesod up to Tifereth. Sagittarius is symbolized by an arrow, which is fitting because pathworking on the tree, Samekh is like where you would sling yourself upwards towards the HGA. The subtitle of the text in Liber Samekh quotes, Diergia Goetia summa congressus cum daemon, translated to English from Latin as, the orgy of the howling spirits, in short, the supreme meeting with the devil, end quote. This essentially means that this ritual's intent is to perform invocations of the lowest to attain the highest. As we shall see in a few minutes by examining the text, we are invoking the devil, Satan, as the keeper and guardian of the unconscious depths, hell, to overcome his blockade, which will allow us to reach the heights, the most inward depths of our mind and soul. The text is given the subfigure 800. 800 is omega of the Greek alphabet by Gematria. Also, it is pay final. By Greek Gematria, we also get such words as Lord God, faith, swine, sleep, the great power, of the world or of the universe, cosmos. I find that this group is very interesting together. The text Liber Samekh is to invoke the HGA. Some of these words are very descriptive of the HGA and its nature, especially in relation to the magician. The HGA as the cosmos, the macrocosm, and the magician is the microcosm, the hexagram and the pentagram respectively. Lord God, written in Greek, obviously reminds us of Adonai. Sleep, well, that reminds me of Konxon Pax, the Wake World, which you should read if you haven't. In Crowley's Liber D 500, the following is found under the number 800. There is but a single word, Kosheth, which is Kof, Shin, and Tau, and that means literally a bow, and Crowley gives the sign of Sagittarius next to that. These three letters are the three paths leading from Malkuth, hence much symbolism of the rainbow of promise, according to Crowley's Liber D. Liber Samekh was written by Crowley in Cefalù at the Abbey of Thelema for Frank Bennett to help him attain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. But it is not an original ritual. Of course, it is a revised version of the preliminary invocation of the Goetia, which Mathers edited and Crowley published in the early 1900s. That being a revised form of the Stele of Jehu the Hieroglyphist from the Magical Greek Papyri, which was translated by Hans Dieter Betzt. The Headless One is mentioned elsewhere in the PGM, again that's the Greek Magical Papyri, for different reasons, but one which struck me is for the Headless One to help with Bez, a specific deity, in a dream oracle ritual. This is interesting because of two lines I will speak about much later in this talk where the Barbarous Names Yah Bez and Yah Paphras are mentioned. At present, I do not know whether it was Crowley or Mathers who actually revised the ritual of the Headless One into the Bornless One. Most probably it was Mathers, but I've even heard people claim that it was Alan Bennett, so I have my doubts on that, but we really don't know. Nevertheless, Crowley revised it again into Liber Samekh for Frank Bennett. Throughout Samekh are many notes about what each of the barbarous names mean. I should first say I do not intend to go over the entire ritual word by word as I thought I might when I started this script. That would simply take too much time. I will then just go over sections A, AA, and H, which are short but important verses of the invocation, which will help to explain a lot about this ritual. After those, I will pick a select few words or lines to analyze, as by then I should have made clear all that is needed for you to continue where I have stopped, and certainly how to examine and perform and get the most out of this ritual. Perhaps in the future I will go over just the barbarous names of this text, but that will not be today. In the Equinox of the Gods, the ritual of the Bornless One is the ritual Crowley used in the King's Chamber on March 16, 1904, to show his wife Rose the sylphs, according to him. That ritual may very well have been responsible for Crowley receiving the Book of the Law, as it seems that Rose became possessed and informed him in the days to come on how Aiwass intended to speak to him. Being that this ritual does invoke one's HGA, I am curious whether that was Aiwass, Horus, or Rose's own holy guardian angel, or some other entity, identifying as Horus, which was speaking through her. Whatever the case, it is a good example of how performing the ritual shook the world. How over 100 years later we are here breaking it down to see its inner workings still. Let us now begin to look at what the Bornless One is, as well as the Headless One, since it is derived from that former name. In the PGM glossary, there is a following definition of the Headless One by Betz. Headless One, well, quote, Headless One, in Greek, akephalos. The headless god is one of the most peculiar deities of the PGM. His origin seems to be in the older Egyptian religion, but he became very popular in Hellenistic Egypt, where he could be identified with Osiris and Bisas. Headless deities are also known outside Egypt. Plutarch tells about the headless Molos in Crete, Pausanias of the headless Tridon in the temple of Dionysus in Tanagra. End quote. On a scholastic search engine, I also found this summary of the Greek word akephalos. Quote, headless, ambivalently interpreted demonic figure of Greek popular belief from antiquity into modern times, comparable to the headless specters of the superstitions of the rest of Europe. Negatively viewed, the akephalos, or akephali, are spirits of the dead from the group Asroi, the untimely deceased, whose circumstances of violent death through accident or beheading cause them to appear as especially evil specters. End quote. As an interesting side note, the Halloween story of the Headless Horseman may be viewed then as a Christian superstitious slander of such entities. Just thought that's fun to note down. In a sense, Osiris, as not only beheaded, but also having suffered total dismemberment, should certainly fit into this class of spirit. That Osiris would have been the head of the pantheon and synonymous with the sun, as we see in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the great signs of 5th degree equals 6 square, it becomes more obvious how the ritual of the Headless/Bornless One has a connection to invoking the Holy Diamond, and how it works upon the heart area of the Tree of Life and the Magician. Osiris is one of the gods corresponding with the sun. In 776.5, Asar, which is Osiris, is listed on Pat 6, Tiferath, Sol. I believe he's also on Shin, -31 bis, which is fire and spirit. Just interesting to note. So there's that connection with spirit. While putting together my notes, I actually discovered something I believe is very profound regarding this ritual. This is just a notion, but to me it makes sense. You may disregard it if it doesn't suit you, or if you believe it just doesn't apply. Taking akephalos and removing the first letter of the word, the A, we are left with kephalos, which readers of Crowley's Liber 333 will recognize as kephale, the union of Ketes and Phallus, the sun and moon, Yoni and Lingam. A indicates spirit via the number 0. It's Atu, the Fool, the magical power to go. This interested me, as I will explain shortly. Such symbolism of duality is very important regarding this ritual. As stated, I am uncertain of who changed the Headless One to the Bornless One, but I see that they are certainly interchangeable terms. The Bornless One to me sounds like Harpocrates, the babe in the egg. The Headless One sounds more like a spirit that resides above the abyss, headless as though it does not have or use a mind. It is above reason and the Ruach. Both are connected to Bina in that regard. and everything above the abyss is extremely interconnected anyways. Harpocrates is Aleph, the Magister Templari, parentheses Vide Liber Tau, end parentheses. Headless, Neshchama, and Archaia, or both, and transcending them, thus the Yechaida/Kether. Perhaps the Greek term akephalos again signifies all of this. A, being Harpocrates and Bina, Kephalos, the Yoni Lingam, Nuid and Hadid, Bina and Chachma in union. On top of that, Saturn is indicated by not only Bina, but the babe in the abyss, which is Harpocrates in the womb of the mother, hence he is bornless. This is all connected quite nicely by the upper point of the hexagram that reaches through the abyss, signifying both the abyss and Bina by corresponding to Saturn. The hexagram, of course, is representative of the Holy Guardian Angel, the sphere of the Ruach, with the sun centered in it. Before moving to the ritual, there are two short paragraphs that are useful in their own right, so I'll just make quick mention. These are under the title, and above the ritual. They read, Liber Samekh, being the ritual employed by the Beast 666 for the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel during the semester of his performance of the operation of the sacred magic of Albermelin the Mage. Prepared on XVII Sun in Virgo at the Abbey of Thelema in Cephaladium by the Beast 666 in service to Frater Progradior. Essentially, this just reiterates that this text was previously known as the Ritual of the Bornless One, was revised by the Magus of the AA 666 for Frater Progradior. Progradior is Latin for several things and can be translated as, quote, I come, go, or march forth, forward, or onward, advance, proceed, end quote. It can also translate as progressive. The idea encapsulated is that in this person's magical motto, I just think it's interesting to note, is that the brother is changing by action or motion. So, Frater P, which is Progradior in this case, that is, the brother who proceeds forward progressively, was an Adeptus Minor without 5th degree equals 6 square, was ready for the attainment of knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. In my view of this work, there are 3 recommended means to attain union with the HGA. The first is the Albermelin working, a 6 to 18 month long series of isolated magical retirement rituals where the magician does not only rituals but prayers, fasting, etc., as outlined in the Book of the Sacred Magic of Albermelin the Mage. There are 2 versions, the French 6-month ritual Crowley had access to, and a more recently translated German transcript that is out now in English and has up to an 18-month working outlined within it. That is the first method. The second is a revised version of the Albermelin working, which Crowley received in the Cry of the 8th Aether, called Liber 8, and is very similar, save for a ton more Thelemic and Hermetic undertones and symbolism, replacing the Jewish symbolism of the previous method. The last method is Liber Samekh, or constant, daily to 4 times or more daily invocations of the Bornless One. Now, my favorite part. It is time to analyze the main body of the text and discern its practical applications. To do this, I will quote a passage and allow the text to pop up on screen with the portion we are working on highlighted for your viewing ease. Liber Samekh is composed of 3 points. The ritual itself is point 1. Point 2 is an explanation of the ritual. Point 3 dissects and announces the prerequisites for the union of the magician and their HGA and the nature of their relationship, with a bunch more symbolism surrounding all of that. Even with this information, how Crowley came to the conclusion about what the Barbarous Names and the text of the verses mean is left unsaid. Without understanding of Kabbalah, Gematria, and Hermetic occult insights of a high degree, it may be confusing to some, especially those new to this ritual or the occult in general. That is why I'm here, to help you understand how he determined what each barbarous name means in the context of this ritual, as well as how to get the most from performing this ritual. Ceremonial magic, but especially this text, requires identification with what is being said. That is of the utmost importance. You are not just reciting words, you are affirming in yourself what you are saying to be truth. And then you are actualizing what you are saying, whether by visuals, feeling, or other means. Note, you are directing energy. You must know what you are saying to be truth. You must become what is written in the ritual. But in order to do that, you must understand the nuance of what is written and being recited. Much of these verses are very complex, and one not well versed in magic and hermetic occultism will get lost. The seemingly arbitrary will go right over one's head, for nothing said or done in this is arbitrary. It is all dealing with the utmost profound of the holy mysteries, especially those of the highest realms and the most internal. So, let's get into this. The Oath. The ritual begins with, quote, Section A, the Oath, end quote. Liber Samekh is the most well-ordered version of this ritual. The Bornless One is better than the Headless One version from the PGM, which was an absolute cluttered mess. Section A has 11 verses. For information about the number 11 in Thelema, see my video in the description below. In short, 11 is the magical power of spirit upon physical matter. It is also the union of the pentagram and hexagram, micro and macrocosms, man in the universe, and the magician and his angel. Whether this portion of Samekh has this many lines intentionally or not, it is uncanny. Verse 1 begins, quote, Thee I invoke, the Bornless One, end quote. These opening 11 lines begin the invocation with the formula of Yod He Vav He as outlined in Magic and Theory and Practice. Chapter 3, the formula of Tetragrammaton. To use this formula, the magician calls the deity, first by Yod, appealing to the god through the fire of will and higher aspiration, next by He of Tetragrammaton, by either creating an image of the deity or describing its nature and characteristics, then Vav, by bringing the deity into oneself. Last, through the He final, the deity being inside the magician, the bond is made whole and the god works through the magician. In line 1, Crowley confirms that the Bornless One is, as I described, a spirit above the abyss, synonymous in that sense with Kether through the union of Nuit and Hadit. Quote, He identifies his angel with the Ayin Sof and the Kether thereof, one formulation of Hadit in the boundless body of Nuit, end quote. Lines 2 to 4 state, quote, Thee that didst create the earth and the heavens, Thee that didst create the night and the day, Thee that didst create the darkness and the light, end quote. These lines describe the union of opposites that are obliterated by Samadhi. Further, they describe the holy guardian angel as the absolute authority in the magician's life, an entity more closely connected to the magician, more important than any other deity. This angel has constructed the life of the magician in all ways, set up all ordeals, and is their ultimate guide who has created everything. Implied is the union of flesh and spirit. Invoked is the ability to unite the pentagram and hexagram, which is being sought through this invocation. I am also reminded of Nuit saying, I am divided for love's sake for the chance of union, if that's from Liber. Now moving on to line 5, quote, Thou art Asar un Nefer, myself made perfect, whom no man hath seen at any time, end quote. In Liber Samekh, this is a change from the Bornless and Headless One rituals, which both had Asaranophris instead of Asar un Nefer. A note in the glossary of Bet's translation of the PGM tells us that Asaranophris is equivalent to the Egyptian Wasir Wun Nefer, Osiris the Beautiful. There is also the Pharaoh Asaranophris mentioned in the PGM just a few lines later, informing that Osiris is identified with the high priest, the magician performing this ritual. But in Liber Samekh, Crowley's note on line 5 tells us that Asar un Nefer is about the HGA, that the magician, or, quote, is himself made beautiful, end quote. In the note on line 5, Crowley goes on to explain that since Osiris was the initiator in the old Aeon, but now Horus has replaced him, therefore, quote, it is advisable to replace the name Asar un Nefer by that of Ra-Hoor-Khuit at the outset, and by that of one's own holy guardian angel when it has been communicated, end quote. Also in place of Horus, the magician, no longer bound by the thralls of death and the dying god, are identified with the fool Harpocrates, thus Pan or Baphomet. You can then work out the symbolism based on my introduction describing the nature of the Bornless One as synonymous with the sphere of Bina. Last, this is one thing I have noticed for myself. When I recite, quote, whom no man hath seen at any time, end quote, rather than interpreting the line to mean no one can ever see a visual of the Bornless One, I've taken it to mean that Nemo, no man who has crossed the abyss, can commune with their angel any time they so wish, since they are in perpetual union with it and all things. Lines 6 and 7, quote, thou art Yahbez, the truth in matter. Thou art Yahpaphras, truth in motion, end quote. These at face value are polarities again, Nuit and Hadid or Horpokrat and Ra-Horkuit. Quote, Bez is the ancient Egyptian god of childbirth, fertility, sexuality, humor, and war, but served primarily as a protector god of pregnant women and children. He is regularly depicted as a dwarf or gnome with large ears, long-haired and bearded, with prominent genitals and bowed legs, end quote. Apophis is, quote, the Egyptian demon of chaos, who had the form of a serpent and, as the foe of the sun god Ra, represented all that was outside the ordered cosmos. Although many serpents symbolized divinity and royalty, Apophis threatened the underworld and symbolized evil, end quote. Although I see Apophis as no such thing, if he is hated, it is because his presence ushers forth karma rapidly. Those who hate him simply have too much baggage they are unwilling to sort through. I take these two deities in these lines, Bez and Apophis, to indicate sexual tantra in a sense, a stimulation of the kundalinis from the Svadhisthana and Muladhara chakras through the genital stimulation. This in no way means you are actually performing sex actions during these lines, you are merely invoking the energy of them. If you keep what I said in mind, as I read Crowley's notes on lines 6 and 7, it makes perfect sense. So, these notes on 6 and 7 are, quote, he hails him as Bez, the matter that destroys and devours Godhead for the purpose of the incarnation of a god. He hails him as Apophras, the motion that destroys and devours Godhead, for the purpose of the incarnation of any god. The combined action of these two devils is to allow the God upon whom they pray to enter into enjoyment of existence through the sacrament of individual life, bread, the flesh of Bez, and love, wine, the blood or venom of Apophras, end quote. Line 8 reads, quote, thou hast distinguished between the just and the unjust. In fact, end quote. In fact, lines 8, 9, and 10 refer to the mysteries of the Garden of Eden, and I highly recommend study of the Garden of Eden before and after the fall from either the Equinox Volume 1 or Rigardi's Golden Dawn. The angel can differ between good and evil, thus invocation should do so for the magician as well. Lines 9 and 10, quote, thou didst make the female and the male, thou didst produce the seeds and the fruit, end quote. We began with recited lines about things of the highest nature, deities and concepts. Now, as mentioned, man and woman. Still, we are focused on opposites, but now in a much lower sense. To quote Crowley, quote, love should affect not only the dissolution of the separateness of the lovers into his own impersonal Godhead, but their co-ordination in a child, quintessentialized from its parents to constitute a higher order of being than theirs, so that each generation is an alchemical progress towards perfection, end quote. Line 11, the final one of the oath section, quote, thou didst form men to love one another and to hate one another, end quote. This touches on how one's view of the world is either in harmony with life or resentful thereof. Moving on to section AA, line 1, quote, I am Ankafna Konsu, thy prophet, unto whom thou didst commit thy mysteries, the ceremonies of Chem. Really, end quote. Really quick, you could personalize any ritual when you're doing it, so instead of Ankafna Konsu, you could put your own magical motto, or you could stick with this, whatever you're comfortable with. So here, I always say my magical motto instead of calling myself Ankafna Konsu. And I replace Chem with the ceremonies of Tomegaderion. You may do as you like. In line 1, basically, you're saying who you are as a magician, and therefore what your authority to call upon the angel is, affirming that you have been handed the keys to the kingdom of the royal mysteries. Line 2, quote, thou didst produce the moist and the dry and that which nourisheth all created life, end quote. These conditions of nature are also conditions of the human body in a certain way. It identifies the seed in earth with the male seed in womb. In Crowley's note, he affirms this by reminding us of the Emerald Tablet and the universal medicine, the Elixir Vitae, which is a material I cannot speak openly on due to oaths. To continue, line 3, quote, "Hear thou me, for I am the angel of Ptah Apophras, Ra. This is thy true name, handed down to the prophets of Chem," end quote. Now, the angel is invoked, and the magician speaks as though he is the angel because they are in union. The name, Ptah Apophras Ra, is unique and much like the grade signs of 5th degree equals 6 square of AA. Essentially, the wheel of samsara is indicated, death, union, creation of a child anew. See the opening lines of Liber Samekh. Crowley's note on the line reads, quote, "He hails his angel not only as, quote, un nefer, end quote, the perfection of, quote, Asar, end quote, himself as a man, but as Ptah Apophras Ra, the identity Hadid, wrapped in the dragon Nuit, and thereby manifested as the sun Ra-Hor Kuit. The egg, or heart, girt with the serpent, is a cognate symbol. The idea is thus expressed later in the ritual," end quote. Now remember, the point of this ritual is to invoke your HGA. He is your most personal deity, the intermediary between you and that which is beyond all, especially even beyond spirit. Though some of these barbarous names are of other deities, you are not necessarily invoking them, but the power of them, the energy and authority they represent as extensions of yourself. For example, you are not invoking Apophis, but what Apophis represents and can do in this particular context as stated above. A great much of what remains of the barbarous names revolve around the symbolism of Satan, the serpent, and the sun. Much of it in an alchemical sense, all of it in an initiatory sense. The heart girt with the serpent is the Orphic egg, which resides spiritually in the chest of the magician. It is quite literal symbolism of the male seed impregnating the womb, but on a cosmic level instead of human. Thus, being in the location of Tifereth is symbolic of the sun. I am reminded then of the number 358 in Gematria, which gives these 3 words, Messiah, Nechesh, Ashium. Crowley writes elsewhere, something to the effect that the serpent is not the enemy of mankind, but more or less the savior who freed mankind from the slavery of the demiurge, giving us knowledge by initiating Eve. This serpent was named Nechesh and is on the list above. He might as well be Eve's HGA, for what it's worth. In a sense, he is the Messiah. Iao, surrounded by the 3 mother letters, is very much like the heat of the sun, cooking the 3 alchemical elements in the alembic to make earth, thus causing birth, life, and death. Also, there is the mean to transcend them upwards on the tree of life, moving from bottom towards the supernal triad. Note also, Amesh means darkness, Iao, Isis, Apophis, Osiris, 3 phases of Tifereth, the light of the sun. In a way, the duality of light and night, or darkness of space, as an illusion, for there is light everywhere, invisible, save for when it reflects upon an opaque surface, is present here. Satan, in the context of this ritual, is very important. He is the keeper of the gates to the unconscious mind. The word Satan appears 9 times throughout Liber Samekh. The last time is a good explanation of Satan in this ritual. Quote, "Now this word Sabaf, S-A-B-A-F, being the number 70, that equates to 70, is a name of Ain, the eye, and the devil our lord and the goat of Mendes. He is the lord of the Sabbath of the adepts and is Satan, therefore also the sun, whose number of magic is 666. The seal of his servant is the beast." End quote. Another note is on Athalibereset. Quote, "Thou, Satan's son Hadith, that goes without will." End quote. I think a few things should be made clear in our view of Satan. He is the enemy of the Christian church, therefore he opposes the very things we oppose, sexism, racism, ignorance, fear in all of its many forms. Though Satan has been portrayed as the most evil of demons, fallen angels, etc., that might be closer to the Qliphothic Dalmiel, that is Satan and Moloch, or even Samael. But that is not the same Satan, which basically just means the enemy, that we are referring to here. No, we have clearer identification of Satan with the winged snake Hadid. He is our most inward point, or center of our being. He is our energy source of motion. He is evil if you do evil, nothing less, nothing more. In a sense, these barbarous names invoke that, our Hadid per se, but his character in particular ways. He does not have a will, as he is doing everything in union with Nui. We are responsible for our will, our actions. In Thelema, we have no devil to blame for what we think and do. Then, in other senses of Satan, by the use of other barbarous names, we are invoking Satan as a blockade to the depths of our being. We use Nuid and Hadid as intermediaries with the Kabbalistic zero, the absolute and unknowable. In ways, interpreting the actions of Nuid and Hadid can help us get an understanding of not only what the universe is, but of creation itself and how to utilize the act. But keep in mind, too, that we can never truly know the absolute. Our minds are meat, and spirit is so much beyond that. It's like trying to use a calculator as a dictionary. It just doesn't work that way. The brain cannot comprehend the unrational. But I digress. Back to Satan. Crowley has a particular note that is of interest upon the barbarous names Ape, that's A-E-P-E. Quote, "Thou exalted one, it, the spiritual semen, the adept secret ideas drawn irresistibly from their hell by the love of his angel, leaps up, it leaps forth." End quote. Upon this quote, next to Ape, just a little down, Liber Samekh writes, glossary note number 3, quote, "It is said among men that the word hell deriveth from the word helon, or hele, to conceal, in the tongue of the Anglo-Saxons. That is, it is the concealed place, which, since all things are in thine own self, is the unconscious." End quote. Ape has another interesting factor in this ritual. By Greek gematria, it equates to 91, which happens to be the summation of 1 to 13, 13 being achad, unity. 91 also gives Amen and Mana, the heavenly bread, as well as Kamiel, the angel of Geburah. As cliché as this is, I'll say it anyway, is not love a battlefield, ha! But really, these numbers go well with Crowley's note, so I can understand his justification by changing the spelling of Ape by adding an E so that Mana is present to go with his note about the seed of will, the spiritual semen, the spiritual seed. This spiritual seed may very well be the letter Yod of the formula Ararita. Again, another solar formula of which each letter corresponds to one point of the hexagram, save Yod, which corresponds with the center of the hexagram. In the Hermetic lamp, the light of the candle flame is synonymous with this Yod, a flicker of fire, which is none other than Hadid. For Hadid is, quote, "the core of every star in the heart of every man," end quote. The letter Yod plays double for a Hadid, as it also corresponds with Chachma. In the formula of Yod He Vav He, Yod being fire, rests in Chachma, and its very most upper tip just touches Keter. So this inner place is both the heart and the unconscious mind above the abyss. For a more in-depth analysis of Satan, the Sun, and the Serpent, I recommend the YouTube video, The Principle of Satan in Thelema. There you could get a much better analysis of these symbols in a wider context. Another symbol I should briefly mention that is connected to Liber Samekh is the lion serpent. This differs from the lone serpent in a couple of ways. In Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, Crowley wrote the Creed, which is recited by the congregation, and the third line states, quote, "And I believe in the serpent and the lion, mystery of mystery, in his name Baphomet," end quote. Also in the Mass, the priest invokes the lion serpent as he which, quote, "destroys the destroyer," end quote. This symbolism is certainly aligned with that of Liber Samekh, especially that the Bornless / Headless One is that which has been destroyed or destroys itself, much like the phoenix of Keter. All of the symbolism of the lion serpent is found in the occult interpretation of the zodiacal Leo. Symbolized by lion, the sigil of Leo appears to be a semen, or one particular seed of semen, or innermost will of the magician, the serpent which impregnated the egg, destroying itself to create the child. More can be said, but it would mostly be rehashing symbolism covered elsewhere in a slightly different manner or wording. A lot more could be said upon each and every word of Samekh, but again, I only wish to go to the very end now, section H, for time reasons. So that is section H, the charge to the spirit. So I'll quote, "Come thou forth and follow me, and make all spirits subject unto me, so that every spirit of the firmament and of the ether, upon the earth and under the earth, on dry land and in the water, of whirling air or of rushing fire, and every spell and scourge of God may be obedient unto me." End quote. Firstly, when I perform the ritual of the Bornless One, I recite this verse after each of the following sections. The 4 sections attributed to the 4 elements, where you would give the 4 grade signs, and again after the section when you're facing east again and give the signs of LVX, and then once more at the end of the ritual, before the final short verse, Iao, Sabeo, such are the words. Now Liber Samekh has this phrasing, the charge of the spirit, after each of these verses, but in the preliminary invocation, it just says, "Hear me," and so it was implied. Now secondly on this portion, these statements in the charge to the spirit were very much favored by Aleister Crowley. When he revised Alan Bennett's Invocation of Tahuti, Liber Israfel, this charge found its way into that ritual. It is in Crowley's spring equinox ritual, the Invocation of Horus, as well. Off the top, I know he used it elsewhere, but to save time for myself and avoid searching through books, I'll leave it at that. He's used it multiple times in other rituals. This verse is one of my favorites as well. It is very powerful and very empowering. It can also be egotistical inducing in a bad way if one is not stable and secure with themselves. But that goes for all magic. At face value, it seems simple and straightforward. In its own way, it means exactly what it says. You are calling to your angel to grant you the power over all things earthly, spiritual, lowly, terrestrial, elemental, and heavenly. But let's go further into it. In section G, just prior, the magician will have affirmed themselves as the Bornless One. Crowley describes the process of utilizing this section to the fullest thus, quote, "Now let him not only fill his whole being to the uttermost with the force of the Barbarous Names, but let him formulate his will, understood thoroughly as the dynamic aspect of his creative self, in an appearance symbolically apt. By its virtue that concealeth the lion and the serpent that is his image may appear adorably upon the earth forever. Let then the adept extend his will beyond the circle in this imagined shape, and let it radiate with the light proper to the element invoked. And let each word issue along the shaft with its passionate impulse, as if its voice gave command thereto, that it should thrust itself leapingly forward. Let also each word accumulate authority, so that the head of the shaft may plunge twice as far for the second word as for the first, and 4 times as for the third as the second, and thus to the end. Moreover, let the adept fling forth his whole consciousness thither. Then at the final word, let him bring rushing back his will within himself, steadily streaming, and let him offer himself to its point, as Artemis to Pan, that this perfectly pure concentration of the element may purge him thoroughly and possess him with its passion." End quote. That the charge to the spirit is spoken several times throughout the ritual, I see it as a process that builds up over the course of the ritual until the final time that it's said, when, at that tipping point of built-up energy, it is a reality come to a head and bursts forth. It requires intensity of a will that has been built up, condensed, and compacted into a single point of focus under immense pressure. Upon reading over Crowley's notes on the charge, there isn't much I can add, so I will simply quote select portions to end this video. Quote, "Let the adept take note of the wording of the charge. The firmament is the Ruach, the mental plane. It is the realm of Shu or Zeus, where revolves the wheel of the gunas, the 3 forms of being. The aether is the Akasha, the spirit, the aether or physics, which is the framework on which all forms are founded. It receives, records, and transmits all impulses without itself suffering mutation thereby. The earth is the sphere wherein the operation of these fundamental and etheric forces appear to perception. Under the earth is the world of those phenomena which inform those perceived projections and determine their particular character. Dry land is the place of dead material things, dry, i.e. unknowable, because unable to act upon our minds. Water is the vehicle whereby we feel such things, air their menstruum, wherein these feelings are mentally apprehended. It is called whirling because of the instability of thought and the fatuity of reason, on which we are yet dependent for what we call life. Rushing fire is the world in which wandering thought burns up to swift darting will. These four stages explain how the non-ego is transmuted into the ego. A spell of God is any form of consciousness, and a scourge any form of action. The charge, as a whole, demands for the adept the control of every detail of the universe which his angel has created as a means of manifesting himself to himself. The adept sums up all these items by claiming authority over every form of expression possible to existence, whether it be a spell, idea, or a scourge, act, of God, that is, of himself. The adept must accept every spirit, every spell, every scourge as a part of his environment, and make them all subject to himself. That is, consider them as contributory causes of himself. They have made him what he is. They correspond exactly to his own faculties. They are all ultimately of equal importance. End quote. Love is the law, love under will. That's our lecture on Liber Samekh. I hope that this helps you not only perform the ritual, but really get the most out of it. So, best of luck in your practices. Again, I just couldn't go over every single line by line or word in the ritual. This has already been almost an hour. It would have been at least double that. So I'm going to leave this here. You guys take care, and I'll see you in the next one.